Hi, this is Teddy.
And this is Arthur.
You're listening to
Jamia Wilson
on Two Broads Talking Politics,
part of the Demcast Podcast Network. Bye, y'all.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts, and I'm on with my co-host Sophie. Hey Sophie.
Hello.
And the third broad joining us today is Jamia Wilson, who is the director and publisher of Feminist Press. Hi Jamia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we are thrilled to be talking to you today. So there is a ton of stuff we can be talking about right now. And I wonder if maybe you could, just for listeners who might not know as much about you, just give us sort of a brief introduction to who you are, and then we can jump into some important topics.
Hi, so I'm so thrilled to be on with you, and I am a broad who loves books and feminist activism, so I feel like this is a perfect podcast to join the conversation on. I'm the director and publisher of the Feminist Press at the City University of New York, and I'm also an author for readers of all ages with a specific passion for writing children's books. And I cut my teeth on feminist activism when I started my career, and really started that working at Planned Parenthood as their youth organizer and working at the federal PAC, and has been just causing good trouble ever since.
I love it. I love it. So one thing I wanted to make sure we talk about, and we can talk about all sorts of different things, but since we're on with you right now, just a couple days ago as we're recording, Kamala Harris withdrew from the presidential race. And I know Sophie and I are sort of really still in our feelings about it. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that and how important her being in the race was to so many of us, a woman of color. And I believe a sorority sister of Kamala as well.
I am. I love that you did that research. Yes, I am an AKA Alpha Kappa Alpha Incorporated, and she is one of our sorors. And I thought it was really, really sad, but also, telling that when a bunch of our sorority sisters did our ski week call at a Kamala rally, there was a journalist who decided to write about it as screeching and felt the full wrath of Black Twitter for not understanding the sisterhood. So I'm really proud of our soror and her leadership, and really sorry to see her leave the race.
Yeah, I know, at least for me, it's been so deeply meaningful to have so many women running this year. It was deeply meaningful to have Hillary Clinton running, but to have so many different women that you can sort of see them all as people and not just like the woman in the race. I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about that and how you're viewing this election and having women, but now having sort of this diminished primary race that's so much whiter and maler than we were all hoping for.
Yes, I think what's super sad about what I'm seeing on the field right now is that it is actually exemplifying all of the problems that we have systemically with our nation, our culture, and our institutions, by looking at the fact that we are facing a strong possibility of an all-white debate stage that is dominated by white males and billionaires. Really kind of shines a light on what needs to change for us to get closer to the promise of America. And I think that one of the things that has emboldened me in seeing this has been seeing other women who are running and who are in politics talking about these systemic issues as we've seen these things play out. So seeing Elizabeth Warren mention that Kirsten Gillibrand and Kamala Harris leaving the race had to do with systemic issues, and systemic issues that are related to economic inequity in this country, and how that connects to what all of us women in this country understand around wage inequity. So although I'm deeply sad about what we're seeing now, I feel that this is kind of a moment like how I felt in 2016, where my mom, who had grown up during the civil rights movement, had been an activist, arrested 28 times during the civil rights movement, had said to me, well, right now you need to treat it like a big boil where all of our scum and muck is coming to the surface, that people can't look away and deny that this is who we are and where we are as a nation. I feel that what is happening in this field right now exemplifies this on every level. The fact that there are people who are questioning the resume of people like Senator Harris as it relates to Pete Buttigieg shows me everything I've ever seen in every boardroom that I've been in around perceptions of who has power, who's the most intelligent, and who should be able to fail up. So what I hope about this moment is that we can continue to unearth these issues and talk about what we can do to solve these issues systemically and vote in the right people who can change these issues. And the people most close to the problems, the people who are most impacted by these inequities, should be the ones who should be in leadership around changing them.
And so sort of what can we do to take action? Because I find myself becoming frustrated that, I and many of my friends obviously feel, saddened at the lack of diversity in the presidential primary field right now. But I don't know how to sort of put that into action. How do I, what can we do to move forward?
What I think is so important is for us to really recognize our grassroots power, to own our power, the power of our dollars, even small ones that we have, to support the people who are still in the race, representing the diversity of who we are, and making sure that those people have a seat at the proverbial and literal table, but then also that we're amplifying our voices, that we are calling on media to be accountable and engaging in direct action around that as well, and saying, this is the media we want to see. These are the kinds of questions we want to see. These are the kinds of interviewers, and really pushing media outlets as well to take responsibility in their role of how we got here, I think is another important thing we can do, and amplifying our voices via letters to the editor, social media, and getting our communities educated about candidates and kind of creating counter speech to the predominant narratives that are uplifting dominant culture and uplifting narratives that don't serve the majority of us who aren't the most privileged. So those are some things that I'm definitely thinking of doing, and things that I plan to continue to do. I also think it's important for us to continue to talk about systems. I think we have this sort of drug of exceptionalism and individualism in our culture because it's deeply embedded in our economic inequity and structure, and to really kind of talk about the collective impact of what this landscape does for us and how people are feeling it in their everyday lives. So I find it important in my innermost, most intimate conversations, as we're leading up to the holidays now, to actually re-steer problematic conversation into giving people full illustration of what this actually means for their lived experience, to say, hey, you may feel like you're divorced from what is happening on that debate stage, but this is an analogy for how this plays out in your day-to-day life. This is how this will affect you politically. What it means that people can buy themselves into the race has an implication for what that means as it relates to what your taxes look like versus the taxes of several of the billionaires on stage, right? So I'm also trying to use this as an opportunity to help educate others about what's really at stake, because I think one of the most harmful things I hear, at least in some of my circles and close relationships, is people feeling distant from it.
Yeah, it strikes me as you're talking about this that, part of what is frustrating and part of what we have to step back and think about if we're going to think about systems is that we all want to make change immediately. And sometimes we have to sort of play a very long game, and perhaps you have a really good perspective on that, having a mother who was working for civil rights for so long. But, I think what we want to do is be like, how can I change next week's debate? How can I make a difference immediately? And we can, and we should try to do that. But sometimes you have to also be thinking, how can we make a bigger shift that's going to be more long lasting? It's something that I know that I want change immediately and have trouble thinking about that sort of long-term strategic planning sometimes.
Oh, I feel exactly the same way. And I think she was really good at helping me play a long game in all channels of life. And I think in the immediate part of it is because we're having a real, and I'll speak for me, I'll use I statements, but we're having a real trauma response to the toxicity of the landscape, of the climate. And I think that it's by design. If you kind of use a shock and awe method of toxicity, and there's a way in which you kind of shock everyone into complicity through exhaustion. And so I do think that there are things that we have to kind of do every day to push back and to resist, to, can do the everyday things we can to slow down the harm while we're working on the big picture too.
And so part of that long-term big picture thinking, I think, plays into the children's books that you're writing, that, we're trying to shape a generation to come. Can you talk some about the kids' books that you've written? And, Sophie and I both have kids and are thinking about Christmas presents right now. So it's very good timing to be thinking about this.
Oh, thank you so much. I love it. I love that you're raising amazing progressive children, because I really believe that's our present and our future. And I think a lot about the subject of inheritance and kind of what kind of world do I want the next generation to live in? Because there's a lot of things I feel like I inherited that I don't deserve. And so I think that parenting is such an activist piece too, in terms of progressive parenting, that there's a reason that I do the work I do, because I was modeled by parents who showed me that I play a role and that I have power and that my voice matters. And I think that that's why I write these kinds of books, because they used literature and culture to help me understand my power, to help me understand my strengths, and to help educate me outside of the classroom, where there were those gaps around representation, because I'm African American and also a woman and also born with a visual disability. And so they always worked to kind of talk with me about the things I wasn't learning in school, or specifically telling me, these are the values we have in this house, and let's talk about how those values line up or don't line up with what you're learning in school or what you're seeing on TV. And that's why I write children's books, because I feel that teaching children social emotional learning, teaching them empathy, teaching them about the power of community and solidarity versus rugged individualism and toxicity, that those things are extremely important to help us heal instead of harm. And I have started my children's books with a book called Young, Gifted, and Black that was released in 2018. And that book was really the book that I needed as a child, and that my partner illustrator, Andrea Pippins, also needed as a child, both of us growing up as Black children in the U.S., wanting to hear good stories about our people and to hear about Black luminaries around the world who helped shape this world, because those weren't the stories that we were hearing on TV. Those weren't the stories we were seeing. And after that, we got a lot of letters from children of all backgrounds who read Young, Gifted, and Black and appreciated that book, saying, well, you're talking about all of these powerful people, but I don't feel like I have power. What can I do to be great? I want to be in your next version of this book, or I want to be in Young, Gifted, and Asian. I want to be in Young, Gifted, and a Woman. And so we worked on Step Into Your Power together, which was about 22 lessons to live your best life. And that book I wrote when my mom was in hospice, and was very much a book that was filled with lots of lessons that I learned from her, and lots of activities that young people could use with their parents to explore the ways in which we kind of show up in progressive community and activism and healing and wellness and our power and our strength. And I also have a new one coming out in March of 2020 called Big Ideas for Young Thinkers, which came from me feeling tired of being the only Black girl in my philosophy class, but also came from me wanting young people to get a different, more diverse idea of who could be a big thinker. Because I always thought, why am I only being told that only white men can be the people who have big and great thoughts in the world? Because I know a lot of people who don't look like that have amazing wisdom. And so this book is about featuring big ideas and also inspiring young people to value their own big ideas. And so we have everyone from Aristotle to Roxane Gay and Kate Mann in this book, Big Ideas for Young Thinkers. And then I also released this year the ABCs of AOC, which was a children's book about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her historic rise as a congresswoman. And mainly that book was about my being inspired by her and wanting to get young people from all backgrounds excited and interested in government and activism, but also to see how her experiences being Latinx, her experiences being from a working family led her to be a great leader of the people. And for her to feel that she had the confidence to run, even though she was an underdog, is also a lesson that I wanted young people to get, because I feel in my life, so much of what has fueled me is me taking that underestimation that I felt so much that I should never have had to feel and saying, actually, I really have deep respect and inherent dignity for myself because I come from great people and I have good ideas and I'm strong. And maybe the world is telling me that I'm not because of these retrograde narratives about what it means to be Black and what it means to be born a girl. And I'm going to shift that because I don't need anyone else's affirmation in that. So I want kids to know these things a lot earlier than I had these realizations for myself.
One of the things I struggle with in talking to my son about some of these sort of big political ideas is, how do I walk the line between explaining what's going on in the world and why it's problematic and like scaring him? Do you have any advice on sort of how to talk to him about sort of these big political issues that can be so depressing or scary or frustrating? How do I sort of talk to him without sort of overdoing it and scaring him?
One of the things I loved about how I was raised was that my parents, they worked a lot in sciences. So although they were both very passionate about writing and culture, they worked in science. And so I was taught critical thinking and analysis very young. And I know some countries do this in their education systems more than the US does. In France, for example, they do that. And they kind of don't shield kids in the way that we do here, which is why I'd learned even in children's books that certain topics are kind of discouraged from many publishers here around children, because we don't want to talk about things that might scare or frighten children here that in Europe or certain other countries, people would say, oh, but children need to learn about the realities of life. It's just about how we organize that information in an age-appropriate way. And I think that your thinking is spot on about that. And so what I like to do is present these kids with solutions-oriented conversations and to work with them in their innate curiosity and their innate fire for finding solutions and problem solving, and say, okay, these are these problems that we're seeing in the world, explained in an age-appropriate way and compassionately. And what do you think could be a solution? And asking them, and then also presenting various solutions other people have thought about for these issues. Because honestly, the very question that you just asked is why I wrote the Big Ideas for Young Thinkers book, because I wanted kids to kind of read a variety of perspectives, of solutions people had for different issues or answers people had for the great issues of life that kids would ask about, like, why do we die? Why do we love? Is there a God? And then giving them a bunch of people's thoughts from around the world and from across time and a variety of perspectives, and then say, okay, now that you've heard all this, what do you think? And I think including them in that process in a way that, you know, doesn't have to necessarily be as graphic or as in-depth as we might need to hear that information, but in a way that meets them where they are, can help give them the building blocks to have more inquiry into their curiosity and just kind of approaching it from a place of curiosity. So, for example, I went to London last year and met with some kids at a school in an under-resourced neighborhood in Manchester. And the kids really wanted to ask me about why Donald Trump became president, why we allowed that to happen in the United States. They expressed their fears that the racism that is existing here was going to end up creating violence in their communities in England. They were making the connections between Brexit and Trump's rise themselves, and said, yes, we want to talk about your book, but now that we have an American author here, we want to ask you those questions. Oh, and by the way, why do you let guns into your school? And initially the teacher said, oh my gosh, you know, you all need to stick to the questions we decided on the note cards for this nice author who came here today. And I said, no, I asked these kids to step into their power. That's literally what the title of my book is. And so if this is what these very smart kids are asking about, let's actually have a conversation about it. And I asked them, why do you think that is? What things do you think might cause people to be fearful of the other? What do you know about hate? And what do you think is a good alternative to that? And how can we get there to counter it? Asking the kids those questions and engaging them. And they're just so smart. I mean, I actually ended up that day thinking, wow, I have a bunch of 13-year-old Britons now who understand why the Electoral College is problematic. Not a goal I had coming in with that day, but their questions led to that. So I just think continuing to have these questions with the kids is important, because I think one of the best gifts my parents gave to me was always appealing to their innate belief in my intellectual capacity. Mm-hmm. And I think our kids are so smart and actually not jaded in some of the ways that we are. And so they're at a prime age to be solutions-oriented and expansive and collaborative, because they haven't gotten kind of indoctrinated to the level we have with the politics of competition and the political economy of xenophobia and all of those things.
Yeah, I've been finding that my kids have been able to sort of synthesize and talk about some of these things at a higher level than I even realized they could. My older son is 8, and he just joined the debate club, which is hilarious that they're allowing 8-year-olds on the debate club at school. But, I asked him what the topic was they were debating the first week, and he said it was police brutality. And, at first I thought, whoa, I don't want my 8-year-old thinking about police brutality. And then I realized, my 8-year-old is privileged. He's white. And, if he were a black 8-year-old boy, I would need to be teaching him about this. And so I was so grateful that they were having them think about these topics, in an age-appropriate way, I'm sure, but that, he was able to grapple with that and think about it in ways that, didn't scare him from being around police, but at the same time made him think really deeply about sort of systemic racism in ways that I wouldn't have thought to bring up with an 8-year-old.
I love that he's having this conversation in debate, because I was thinking the same thing with some of these kids, and it was so interesting because I had one kid who, in the very beginning of, and I think this kid was maybe 12, of the event that I was telling you about, came up to me and he said, I feel really sad that these other kids have gotten their parents to sign up to buy your book, and I can't afford it, but also my parents support Trump. But I like what you had to say, and so I bought him a book myself. And it was so interesting because he said, I just learned from these other kids today. There had been some black kids in his classroom who had said that they came to the U.S. on vacation and were afraid they were going to get shot, and that they had a little fear about coming here. And so I also think that sometimes we think that kids aren't already having these conversations, but they're actually hearing about it at school from their peers. So I think it's really good that you've had that thinking too about your son, because then he can also be an ally to his friends, that, this kid is already formulating beliefs that are different from his parents. And it was really funny too, because I had to kind of manage, how do I manage this now? Because he was reaching out to me on Instagram afterwards and everything. And I was kind of like, I wouldn't want my kid, doing that at that time. So, how do I reach back out to the school or others to say, like, let him know that I enjoyed meeting him and that kind of thing, right? But he just was, so curious and so naturally wanting to kind of reconcile his own ideas about humanity that may have been different from his parents as well, and needing more resources, and connecting the fact that he couldn't afford the book to the struggle of the Black children in his class, which I thought was really great too, and taught me a great deal about how kids inherently understand allyship.
Are there other things that you would like to make sure that we talk about today?
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I just love what you're doing. And I think as someone who's thinking about becoming a parent, I just really appreciate you speaking publicly about your own parenting, because I can tell you that I'm someone who really takes in and listens to hear how other people are grappling with these issues as I work to plan my family. So I want to say that I think it's great that you're having these conversations. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that one thing I'm really proud of is that I read this piece in the Federalist, because I really enjoy reading opposition stuff. We kind of have to just know thy enemy. And they had an anonymous piece by someone who claims to be working in publishing, titled "How the Left is Weaponizing Cancel Culture to Politicize Children's Books." And so they featured the AOC book that I wrote in this piece, and they featured a bunch of other titles, and basically showed their really sharp fear of us writing these books for our children. And it led me to believe that this work is the most important work. The fact that they are trying to demonize activist teachers, that they are concerned about these books engaging in political education that will have effects on the vote, and the fact that, one of their concerns was about Ruth Bader Ginsburg books. They felt that those were threatening, that felt that books that were advocating against white supremacy or promoting consent were threatening to their agenda and toxic for children. Really aligns with Melania Trump's talking points right now, right, about how kids should be left out of politics. And so I actually think that the answer is really about making this an intergenerational movement. And of course, protecting and supporting our kids and giving kids opportunities to formulate their own ideas and to be safe and to be supported. But also, I think that we're really onto something about talking about what it means to educate our kids about these issues soon, because these kids are living in the world and they are being impacted by harmful policies. And so they should have a role in helping us shape the solutions for the things they're going to inherit.
All right. So everyone's call to action now is go buy copies of Jamia's books for your own children, but then also buy copies for their classrooms.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jamia, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a terrific conversation, and I just love the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I can't wait to continue to listen to your podcast, and just really grateful that you're doing the great work you're doing out in the world.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.